There are days when nothing dramatic happens. No argument, no crisis, no visible collapse. But somehow, the weight feels heavier by the end of the day, not because something new appeared, but because everything stayed. The tasks, the expectations, the responsibility no one reassigned. When things got hard, you didn't wake up planning to carry more than your share. You just noticed, slowly, that others stepped back, and someone had to remain. So you did. You stayed in the conversation. When it became uncomfortable, he stayed in the role. When it stopped being appreciated, you stayed present. When absence would have been easier to justify, you held responsibility. When others stepped back, not because you felt strong, but because leaving would have cost something deeper than staying. This kind of weight doesn't look impressive from the outside. It looks ordinary, but it asks a lot from the inside. It asks for emotional restraint, for patience when progress feels slow, for consistency when motivation is unreliable, and it doesn't announce itself as a test. It just keeps showing up. Day after day, you learned how to function while tired, how to answer calmly when your thoughts felt crowded, how to keep your word, even when no one would have blamed you for pulling back. That kind of responsibility shapes a person, not loudly, quietly. And Scripture understands this kind of weight very well. Psalms 73-26 says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart, and my portion forever." This psalm was not written from a season of ease. It came from inner conflict and sustained pressure. When the psalmist speaks of his flesh and heart failing, he is describing exhaustion, not collapse. The promise here is not that responsibility disappears. The promise is that strength is supplied when your reserves run low. God does not shame the tired heart. He sustains it. And that matters for you today, because you didn't stay out of pride. You stayed out of responsibility, and God recognizes the difference. You carried what others released. You absorbed tension others avoided. You held the line when it would have been easier to loosen it. That is not weakness. That is endurance guided by integrity. But endurance has a cost. Some days, that cost feels invisible. You do what needs to be done. You keep things moving. You prevent collapse quietly. And at the end of the day, there is no applause, just fatigue. Psalm 55:22 says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you." David wrote this while under emotional and relational pressure. When he speaks of casting his burden, he is not abandoning responsibility. He is transferring the weight of outcome. The promise is not escape. The promise is sustenance. God does not remove responsibility immediately. He supports you underneath it, so you don't collapse. Under the weight you are carrying, that explains how you are still standing. You may not feel energized, but you are sustained. You learned how to keep going without becoming careless, how to stay engaged without becoming bitter. That balance is not accidental. It is formed in seasons like this. You were required to be stable when others became uncertain, dependable when others disengaged, present when others checked out. That steadiness required discipline, and discipline grows in silence. Psalm 121:3 says, "He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber." This psalm does not promise a smooth road. It promises stability. The path has been uneven, the load heavier than expected. But you didn't lose your footing. You adjusted your pace. You conserved energy. You learned when to slow down, so you could last. That is wisdom under pressure. You didn't carry responsibility perfectly, but you carried it faithfully. And that matters more than people realize. There were moments when you felt alone in the effort. Moments when you wondered if anyone noticed the weight. God noticed. Isaiah 40:31 says, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." Waiting here does not mean inactivity. It means restraint. You waited while still working. You waited while still showing up. And strength was renewed quietly, not as enthusiasm, but as steadiness. Enough patience for another conversation. Enough clarity for another decision. Enough composure for another day. You became more discerning. In this season, gives Bloco Novo Inserito a QUI. Discernment didn't come because life slowed down. It came because you had to decide under pressure. You learned what deserved engagement and what did not. You stopped explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stopped carrying emotional weight. That was never yours. That wasn't withdrawal. That was maturity. You learned that responsibility is also about what you refuse to carry. That wisdom protected you, and it shaped you. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." You guarded your heart, not by becoming distant, but by becoming grounded. You didn't let responsibility harden you. You didn't let pressure turn into resentment. You stayed firm, without becoming rigid. That required constant awareness. You learned how to respond instead of react, because reacting releases pressure briefly, but responding preserves integrity. You held responsibility, not just in action, but in posture. That is character forming. Psalm 66:10 says, For you, O God, have tested us. You have refined us like silver. Refining removes what cannot endure the heat. This season clarified you, your priorities, your limits, your inner structure. You're clearer now. Clearer about what matters. Clearer about what drains you. That clarity came at a cost. But it was not wasted. Jesus spoke directly to people carrying this kind of weight. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus calls those who labor. Rest is not abandonment. It is restoration within responsibility. He understands the cost of staying when others step back. You didn't imagine this season. He didn't exaggerate its weight. You held responsibility when others stepped back, and God saw it. You don't need recognition to validate your endurance. He already knows the cost. Nothing was overlooked. If this message spoke to you, like the video. Share it with someone who carried more than their share. Subscribe for more devotionals like this. And if you feel led, leave a comment saying, "God saw the weight." May His peace find you today.